We're gonna get right into it. Thank you guys for having me. Um, I did do the jetty trip. You guys missed out. You can talk to Michael all about it. He's a dual member of both the Lindben family fly fisher, Lindben fly fishers, and the Santiam Flycasters. You guys here, and we had a great time. I think everyone caught at least 10 to 20 fish. I think between the 9 people I knew were out there, I think we cleared about 250 fish. So it was a terrible night as it goes, but it was a lot of. We really did have a lot of fun. One thing that was really special about that night is we had probably about a half a football field size of water where fish were busting bait fish on the surface. So you really couldn't go wrong. It was awesome. So not to rub salt in the wound on that. That being said, we'll get right into it. So I did a clinic for my club, the Lindben Fly Fishers, and I invited some of the Santiam Flycasters out to come check that out. And it was a whole Stillwater clinic. It was kind of our idea to kind of try something. Our club does something called Mono Rig Mondays in July. So every Monday of July, we do an outing on the north and the south Santiam. We go back and forth, south, north, and we talk about Euro nymphing and things like that. So I took some inspiration from that and did it with Stillwater fishing, and we had a really good time. The classroom time that we did was really long. I think it ended up being like 2.5 hours between questions and everything. So a little too much to do in a night like tonight. So this has a lot of information from that. So if you came to that, it's going to be some repeat. But if you didn't, you're in for a treat. You're going to get a lot of intro stuff on how a new angler would tackle a Stillwater, or at least how I would tackle a Stillwater with the information I have now if I was a new angler. So Beth did a really good job giving me a biography, but here is more of it. So I've been fishing for a very long time, at least in my book, a little over half my life. I've been featured in a magazine article about me. I've also been written some articles for some magazines. I've been a guest on a lot of fly fishing podcasts. So if you like podcasts, for those who know what those are, it's a great thing to listen to on your way to go fishing. So I, if you just search my name anywhere on there, you'll be able to find me on any of the podcast apps. The other thing is I've also been at a lot of fly tying shows. So I tied flies here tonight, but I've also been at the Northwest Expo in Albany. I've also been up in Yakima, Reedsport, Bellevue, Seattle, all over the place with fly tying stuff. So you might have seen me there. I also, like Beth said, I was featured as the Oregon Fly Tyer of the Year last year. I also had been a consultant for a few fly tying companies. That's a little bit about me, and we'll get right into it. So that way it's going to be a lot smoother sailing from here. So what is a Stillwater? It's easy. It's going to be things like a lake, right? So things like lakes, ponds, reservoirs, basically any large body of water that's not salty. There's some that are, I would say, a little salty, places like Pyramid Lake or any lake that doesn't have any outflow. Those are going to get slowly, they're going to get a little bit saltier over time, but generally it's a salt-free large body of water. It's also going to be things that aren't moving. There's going to be no current, so no big water, nothing else like that. It's going to be things like Crane Prairie, pictured here, places like East Lake. It's going to be places like Diamond. There's a ton of other things here and there. Are we looking for? Okay. Does it work now? Nope. Sorry, everyone. I have no speaker on.
Well, I don't want to interrupt.
Okay. All right, let's see here. Sorry, everyone. I think I might have fixed it. Sorry about that, everybody. It's a little bit of annoying to have that, but we'll get right into it. So, Stillwater's are easy. It's a lake, right? We say Stillwater fishing because in fly fishing we like to be fancy. Just like we don't call it a bobber, it's an indicator, right? We try to get real fancy with everything we do. So, Stillwater's the same kind of thing. But the big contrary to popular belief, Stillwaters still move a lot, and we'll talk about that as well. So, making sure everything still works here, but it seems like it's much better. So lakes can be very intimidating. I've been to when I first started stillwater fishing, I almost didn't do it. Probably the first, oh gosh, half of my fly fishing career, I didn't even touch a lake. I didn't even want to go to a lake. It freaked me out. You look at it, it's a big flat plate basically. There's no structure, there's no riffles, there's no runs, there's no seams, there's no boulders, there's no down trees. They're so big you don't want to walk around it. There's trees on the shore. You kind of get really overwhelmed when it comes to a stillwater. And don't get me wrong, they still are at a certain point. Even really, really big stillwaters kind of throw me off. Luckily, speaking of the jetty, basically I fish the jetty like a big stillwater, right? I can't fish the whole thing. That Pacific Ocean's kind of big, and so you have to break it down a much smaller. And that's kind of what we do with our stillwaters here. So once you kind of get into them, you'll start noticing a lot of those features. Like I said, there's no seams. There's lots of seams on a stillwater. When you say there's no structure, there's tons of structure on a stillwater. Once you take some time and kind of soak into a lake and start really thinking about it differently and not trying to think of it as a non-moving river, you'll really see a lot of that structure come out. So wind is the main driving force in a lake. Yes, there are lakes that have inflows and outflows that somewhat create current, but in the grand scheme of things, the wind is your number one current driver within a lake. And so if I go to a lake and I get there and there's no wind, I'm upset. I'm mad. I don't like when there's no wind. The amount of people who have come to me and said, "Hey, I was at such and such lake. It was great. Beautiful sunny sky, not a cloud there, and it was flat calm. No wind at all, and I couldn't catch a fish." I go, "Well, you answered your own question there." That is a great way to not catch a fish, is to have the best beach activity weather you can have. You want it to be very uncomfortable for the people on the shore, because it's going to be very comfortable for the fish, which will make you very comfortable. I can fish in really cold water as long as I'm catching fish, kind of thing. So that's kind of what it is. This is a shot from Kleewax. We went there this year. It was a barn burner of a trip. We had an awesome trip out of Kleewax with our club. Kind of timed it right with stocking schedules and everything. I think I caught 80 fish. It was great. But this is kind of the idea. And the big thing why I bring that up, the wind was howling the entire day. And most people would get there and go, "That's too much wind. I'm done. I'm getting out of here." And they would have missed out on what ended up being one of the best stillwater trips of the year for me. So there's multiple types of lakes. So we're going to get real fancy here. We're going to get really into the details. There's oligotrophic lakes. These are nutrient poor lakes. These lakes are usually very, very clear. They usually are older lakes, and they're usually either at a higher altitude. So a great example of that in Oregon is a place like Clear Lake. Not Clear Lake, Crater Lake. Clear Lake's also a good example of that. You're talking about lakes that have unbelievable visibility. Clear Lake has 40, 50, 60 feet of visibility, depending on what time of year you're going into it. But these lakes have very little plant life. If you think about it, if you go into Clear Lake, you can scuba dive through that thing and see a forest. There's not a lot of weed growth. There's not a lot of mud for the plants to grow in. There's not a lot of nutrients, which means there's not a lot of bugs, which means there's not a lot of fish. If you know, Clear Lake, the only way fish get into Clear Lake is it's stocked. It's pretty consistently stocked throughout the year, and the fish tend to just stay in there until they're caught or eaten by birds or anything else that's around the lake. So oligotrophic lakes have fish in them, but they can be really tough. For example, Crater Lake is also stocked. And if you really want to fish Crater Lake, this is the last summer until 2029. They're doing a bunch of repairs on the trail from the crater rim down to the water. So if you want to fish it, if you want to hike down those switchbacks and catch a rainbow trout in our only national park without a fishing license, you don't need a fishing license to fish there, then now's the time to do it. Mesotrophic lakes, let's see if my little clicker is working here. Perfect. These are stable nutrient load. They're not changing. They tend to be clear. They do have weed growths, but a great example of that is East Lake. East Lake doesn't have an outflow, but it is very deep, and it does get a lot of really clean, clear water as the inflow through springs and snow melt. And so these lakes do have weed growth. They do have a lot of oxygen. They are very deep. I think East Lake at the deepest point is over 200 feet. Same thing with Paulina. So these are productive lakes. Those lakes don't get stocked very heavily, and the fish self-regulate pretty easily. The browns, I don't think they've stocked there in a very long time. They don't stock the kokanee, from my understanding, and I think they very seldom stock rainbows. I think they only stocked fingerlings if they do. It's not as intense as other lakes that need a higher stocking load. Eutrophic lakes, these are the lakes that you want to fish. These are the ones that really, really, really are productive. This is where you're going to catch those football shaped fish. Diamond Lake is a perfect example of this. These are usually shallow lakes with low visibility. I was talking to someone earlier today about a place like Lava Lake. Lava Lake has low visibility. That's a good thing. It means there's nutrients in the water that the bugs are eating. And if the bugs are getting big and they're plentiful, that means the fish are getting big and plentiful. So there's going to be algae blooms in this lake. There's going to be a lot of weed growth. There's going to be scum on the surface in some parts during the year, mainly peak of summer kind of time. But these are very, very, very productive lake. To give you an idea, Diamond Lake gets stocked with nearly 500,000 fish every single year. And I'm not being hyperbolic. It's about 400,000 to 500,000 fish every single year as fingerlings. Right now, they stocked it over the last couple weeks now. Those fish will be legal size by the fall. So in less than 6 months, they're going to grow about 6 to 9 inches. That's an incredible growth rate, but that's because the nutrient load in a lake like that is just incredibly high. There's a reason why there's a specific strain of rainbow called a cranebow. Crane Prairie produces big fish. The last kind of lake is a hypoeutrophic lake, by the name, meaning that it's incredibly nutrient rich. It's a very shallow lake. The best example of that here in Oregon specifically is Klamath Lake. If anyone's been to Klamath Lake, you guys know about the biblical midge hatches that come off there. They have tons of bugs, tons of nutrients. You're also aware that the fish get really, really big in Klamath Lake. The downside, crazy algae blooms, low visibility, very warm water. Those fish can survive in warmer water than most, and that's because they've just been accustomed to it. But those are the kind of lakes that you're looking at. So when you're trying to figure out what kind of lake should I go to, which one's going to be best for me, how should I approach it, these are factors to take into it. If you know you're going to go to a eutrophic lake, you know you can have your pick of the litter when it comes to flies. Where if you go to an oligotrophic lake, you're going to have to be very specific. It's going to be a lot of attractors, it's going to be a lot of bait fish, it's going to be a lot of leeches, and basically you're just trying to hope a fish swims by and sees your fly and wants to eat it. So you want to try to match those kind of things. That's why a place like East Lake is very hatch focused. Beetles, ants, calabatus, those are bugs that are there in the lake, and that's what they know. So just take that into account when you're fishing. It's something to consider as you kind of move along here. So where are the trout in Stillwater? Lakes are big, right? If you think of a lake, I'm trying to think of a lake right now that I know stats of. I think Crane Prairie is like over 3,000 acres. That's over 3,000 football fields. If I try to pick that apart by myself in a float tube, I'd be there for years. Even if you have a boat with a motor, it's going to take a long time to kind of navigate 3,000 acres. So where are they hiding? So you've probably heard of this term if you're big into Stillwater, but if you're in New England, you've probably never heard of the term the littoral zone. The littoral zone is an area where the light from the sun can penetrate through the water, hit the bottom of the lake, and stimulate plant growth. That stimulated plant growth in turn stimulates bug growth, which then in turn stimulates fish growth. And so this is my incredibly well-drawn diagram that I've done of the different zones of the lake. So we're talking about the littoral zone. That's that really cool area with all those weeds. That is what we would want to see. That's the area where fish are. That's why we always fish the shoals. That's why everyone in the middle of the lake is fishing to the shore, and everyone from the shore is fishing over those weed beds. That's where the fish live. That's where their food lives. They might hold in deeper water or in, deeper points or on peninsulas or in drop-offs or in troughs or in channels. But the food, where they're going to feed, is going to be in those littoral zones. And those are typically, the deepest they're going to be is about 20 feet. That changes. Every lake's different. I can't tell you the littoral zone of every single lake in every single part of the world all that time. But generally speaking, if the water's relatively clear, it's going to be about 20 feet. East Lake's a great example, 20 feet. You guys are going there in a week or two. 20 feet deep is kind of where the food is going to max out. And there's going to be obviously more food the more shallow you go because it's getting more of that UV light, more of that plant growth stimulating light. So bigger picture, just so you guys can see it, it's that kind of area that you have there. The next zone is the limnetic zone. This is the area where the sunlight still passes through the water. It just doesn't reach the bottom. So it's stimulating a different type of growth. This type of growth is mostly phytoplankton and zooplankton. Zooplankton and phytoplankton are symbiotic. Zooplankton eat phytoplankton, and the only way phytoplankton grow is through sunlight. And so they kind of work together. So you can have fish that are pelagic. That's the term we use for open water fish. They mostly use it in saltwater stuff. So, like a whale is pelagic. It's going across open ocean, where like a rockfish that we catch off the jetty, that is not going to be a pelagic fish. That's going to be holding close to shore in relatively shallow water. So, fish can be suspended in water. If you're going to go out to East Lake, you're not going to catch a lot of rainbows at 200 feet deep, but you might catch rainbows suspended in that 200 feet of water, 20 feet down, eating plankton, which we also call Daphnia, if everyone's ever heard that term before. Daphnia, blobs, eggs, things like that. So they might be fish in that area. They won't just eat that if you present that fly there. They'll eat leeches and buggers and bait fish and everything in between, but fish can suspend in open water at different depths because of that limnetic zone. Again, a better view of it. You see my great diagram of Daphnia there. It comes in all different colors. Every lake's different. South Twin, for example, the Daphnia there get humongous, like the size of like, I don't know, they're like about 5 millimeters across. They're huge. They look like fleas. I did a throat sample on a fish and I thought I sucked out a bunch of spiders out of it. It was very gross and very weird. But they can be down to as small as about a millimeter. And they range in color from black to brown to kind of like a tobacco olive color to a melon to an orange to a peach. They come in a bajillion different colors. But the fun colors are the ones that are, green, orange, and peach, not the creepy black ones. The benthic zone and the profundal zone. Profundal zone is an area that is water that is not getting sunlight, and the benthic zone is basically the bottom. When you hear about benthic food reports out of lakes or the benthic area of a lake, that's the mud of the bottom of the lake or the rock or the sand or whatever the bottom's made out of. To give you an idea, the benthic food load in a place like Diamond Lake is about 100, oh gosh, what is it, 100 pounds of food per square meter or something like that. It's something outrageous. It's a crazy amount of food load. So that's where a lot of the bugs are going to live. The damsels, the dragonflies, the calabatus, any caddis that are in the lake, leeches, chironomids. The benthic zone is mostly mud and chironomids when it really comes down to it. So that kind of gives you an idea of where the fish are located. So if I was a new angler fishing new water, a new lake, I'm going to East Lake for the very first time because I'm a new member of the club. Where would I go? I'm going to go somewhere in the littoral zone. It doesn't really matter on the lake right now, but you're going to want to focus there. Now, step 2 is going to be places outside there. So I use South Twin Lake because I like going there. It's a fun place to fish. If you never fished it, I highly recommend. But you can see here on this topographical map or depth map that we have here of the lake, you can really see a clear-cut point where you can see the transition from the littoral zone to the profundal zone, and you can kind of see it throughout the lake. The lake's only 50 feet deep. There's not a lot of activity happening in the middle lake. Don't get me wrong, I've caught fish out there. Again, they're suspending, but most of my fish are caught anywhere between 1 to 20 feet deep. And so it gives you a good idea of where to go in a lake. I don't know where to go. We'll go where there's a shoal. You can see down here in the south end of the lake that the transition zone's much faster because it drops off sooner. So I tend to fish the northwest corner or the northeast corner of the lake because you can see how large those shoals are. Larger shoals, more plant growth, more bug growth, more fish theoretically. So when do I target the Stillwater trout? Where do I go? When do I go? I know where to go. I know what kind of lakes are best. Now, when do I go? So springtime, it's a very special time. This is the time when you can catch some of your biggest fish. Right now, we're well past spring with all of our waters. I guess East Lake and even, Three Creeks Lake. Three Creeks Lake, it's a great lake. It might still be snowed in by the time you guys want to go. My plan was to go in a couple weeks, and I'm kind of wishy-washy. I saw a picture from the resort, and the road is still very deep in snow. We got a ton of snow this year, which is great for all of our water, but it just means we might be fishing stuff a little bit later. I'm just hoping it ices out or the road is clear before the 4th of July. Then it becomes a zoo up there. But that being said, springtime for most of our lakes has come and gone, especially out on the coast, but even in Central Oregon. Springtime has come and gone, but there's a really good time. The 3 windows would be ice off. This is the point when the lake is starting to thaw. The surface ice is starting to melt, and the fish are being exposed to the rest of the great world now. But at this point, the fish are hungry. They've been stuck under the ice, eating whatever they can get their grubby little fins on, and they are after real food. And so you can have this really great opportunity as the ice starts to break up where you can catch fish easily, and you can catch very large fish, because the largest fish are going to be the fish that survived all winter long underneath that ice. They were able to outcompete all the other fish that were in there to survive. And so it's a great time. Now, the downside is the dreaded turnover. Turnover is when that ice melts, the surface temperature hits about 39 degrees. That's the densest water can get. And all that surface water will fall to the bottom, forcing all the warmer water, that 40, 45-degree water, up, causing what we call a turnover. That water, as it comes from top to bottom, bottom to top, the bottom water that's warmer will bring all that benthic material up, and the water can get really off color. It is not a fun time. The fish do not like it. Imagine if you were going there and someone turned you upside down and started shaking your lunch money out. You're not going to be wanting to eat anytime soon. And that's the same thing that's happening with these fish, is they do not like it at all. And so if you run into turnover, sometimes it's better just to hit a river if you can. Otherwise, you're going to have a really tough day of catching very few fish. After turnover, post turnover, that springtime can be phenomenal. Lakes like Crane Prairie are fishing really good right now. East Lake is fishing really good. Diamond Lake is fishing very good. Lava's fishing very good. They're all fishing really good right now over in the Central Oregon because they're all post turnover situations moving into summer. So the issue can be unpredictable weather and weird stuff here and there, but the next phase is going to be things like summer. Summer is the best time. It's peak fishing. This is when fish are active. There is a period of time when it gets too hot and the fish kind of go down, but until then, it's awesome. Fish are distributed evenly throughout the water column. They're all over the place. Their metabolic rate is at their peak. Fish are cold-blooded, so they take on the temperature of the ambient environment that they're in. So if the water's 55, the fish are 55. If the water's 65, the fish are 65. And when when water temps are right around high 50s, low 60s, they're at their peak metabolic rate. They need to eat constantly, and they have very little discrimination when it comes to eating. So when you get water temps that are in that range, it's almost impossible not to catch fish as long as your fly is in the water and the fish can see it. That's the biggest trick, is keeping your fly in the water as long as you can. The next thing is hatches are in full swing. You're going to have calabatus coming off on lakes, damsels, dragonflies. There's going to be leeches moving in out and around because they're also cold-blooded as well. So they're going to be doing the same exact thing. You're going to have caddis, chironomids are going to be hatching every day, all day long in different waves. A lake like East Lake is going to have two broods of calabatus. That's how productive they are this time of year. They can have a brood early right now, and they'll have another brood again probably August, September. So it's really, really great. It's fantastic. The sun is up earlier in the day, which means you can get on the water earlier. That's always nice. And the best thing is there's no disruption from the spawn. One of the things is I got a report from a buddy of mine who was fishing East Lake recently. He's catching a lot of browns and calabatus. The reason why he's catching a lot of browns is because the rainbows in there, half of them are going through a phantom spawn. They're trying to do spawning things in the rocks, and they're not in eating mood. By the time you guys go on your trip, that should be over, and you should be in full summer time because fish are now not thinking about the spawn. They're thinking about food, and they're thinking about getting big and eating, and that's what we want them to be in. My favorite time of year to fish is the fall and the autumn. This time is when I normally catch my biggest fish because the fish basically are realizing time is money right now. We're gonna run out of good eating time for the rest of the year, and we got to get the feedback on. And so they are very aggressive. They are targeting high caloric food specifically. Hatches are over, so they're looking at things like boatmen, back swimmers, minnows, leeches, big beetles, big dries, even mice. They're after whatever they can eat. They want to eat big food, and they're willing to work for it. They're willing to chase it down. They can be very, very aggressive. The downside is you have turnover here because that surface temperature of that water is going to go from its warmest that it can be. A lake like Crane Prairie, for example, might get up to 75 degrees on the surface. But as it starts to cool and hits about 39 degrees, usually it's a little bit colder. It's closer to like 36 degrees. But when it hits that temperature, the lake will turn over again and fishing won't be great. And then by the time it settles out and becomes completely one temperature throughout, it's going to start freezing on that surface and it's going to stratify yet again. And then when it's frozen, you can ice fish. What I tell people, my fiance is from the Midwest, people fly fish there too. You just got to stand really far away from the hole. It's the only way to get those flies in there. And then you got to go talk to Beth down to the park and practice a bunch or get a really big hole drilled. But it's tough. Once that water stratifies and that surface starts to freeze, we're kind of done for fly fishing. which doesn't really happen. Most of our things, even if you wanted to fish those lakes, it's too hard to get to them. So, but there's fewer people in the water because fishing opportunities are abundant. Hunting opportunities are abundant in the fall. Everyone's kids are going back to school. Football's back in session. You might need to watch your football, and so you're not going to be on the lake. But I don't care about football. I'm going to be on the lake, and I don't hunt, and I don't really care about salmon too much. So I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be catching those big browns, big tigers, big rainbows that are ready to eat food, and I want to be the food that they eat. So that's a really good time. Now, for the lakes that don't turn over or don't freeze, wintertime can be productive. Oregon Fishing Club's lakes typically don't freeze, especially bigger ones like Chemekety or Turner or Blue Den. They're not going to freeze. And so they can be open water you can fish. Now, the problem with that is the fish still eat. For example, rainbow trout have to eat all the time. They can't shut off that instinct to eat. And so they're still going to be there. They just only eat when they're hungry. When it's summertime, they're hungry constantly. They can't get full enough. Now, in the wintertime, their body just takes a lot longer to metabolize that food. So they don't have to eat as often, but as soon as they're hungry, they're ready to go. So you just have to be there during those times. And so it can be really, really tough. You got to slow down. That's one thing. You need to get the food right in front of their face. So if they're very specific depths or very specific structure, if you're off by a foot or a two, they might not even swim over to eat your fly. It could be the perfect fly, the perfect depth, but if it's not right in front of a fish, they might not even care. So it can be really, really tough. I fish really, really slow. I fish very heavy lines and very buoyant flies at this time. But most of the time, if I'm in the wintertime, I'm tying flies. I tie a lot of flies, and I use this time to fill those boxes so I can spend the spring, summer, and fall fishing more than I'm tying. So use it at that time. It's also a good time to earn a lot of goodwill with spouses and significant others, so that when the summer comes around, you've been like, hey, we've been hanging out all winter. I got to go fishing. So there's all those kind of things you can take into account here. It's also a nice time to take a break. You can rest that shoulder. You can rest your knees from kicking around in your float tube all year. It's a good time for a lot of stuff. But if you have to get that fishing bug out, there's a few places to go. For example, I try to fish Walter Worth Pond here in town, or Junction City Pond, or these other ponds that are around the area, because they stock them between the week of Christmas and New Year's for the people who are kind of in the area to fish. And you can usually pick up a fish or two, but you only get a fish for 3 or 4 hours. But then you still catch something, and you get that. You shake all those cobwebs out, and you're ready. It holds you until about March. So where in these lakes do I target stillwater trout? So we talked about the littoral zone. Another term you've probably heard is the shoals. Shoals are essentially the littoral zone. It's a layman's term for it. This is where the light hits the bottom and stimulates that plant growth, grows bugs, which grows fish. This is where most of the fish are caught in any lake. Yes, you can catch them wherever. There's always going to be a guy who says, I caught a fish right dead center at 25 feet. Sure, that happens, but most fish are caught right at, 100 feet offshore or even closer. I've seen people catch fish inches offshore. So this place where you should start. This is where you should be. This is going to be the most productive fishing you're going to have, is the shoal areas. Open water, like I said, fish can be suspended between 100 and 2 feet deep. It just kind of depends. It's really hard to locate them without a transducer, also known as a fish finder. Without that, they're really hard to spot, because if you're in the middle of a lake like Paulina, how do you know that the fish are 20 feet down, or 30 feet down, or 40 feet down, or 3 feet down without something to let you know that? So this is a great way. The downside is a fly rod can really effectively only fish about 50 feet at the max, and at that depth, it's not doing a great job of it. It can do it, it's just not great. So this is going to happen in lakes that have a really poor riparian zone or shoals. Riparian zone is what we call the plant growth on the shore close to the water. Lakes that don't have that have a big issue. A great example of this is, if anyone knows about the reservoir, Strawberry Reservoir in Utah, basically the shoreline is a desert. There's nothing there. And so what happens is the fish will suspend in open water because the wind will rip through and blow stuff off the shore, kind of in the middle of the lake, and in these arms and fingers along the water. So lakes that don't have a good riparian zone will have more fish suspended out in open water. Luckily, here in Oregon, we have a lot of really healthy lakes with lots of good vegetation all around them. So it's not a big deal. It's not a big thing here, but some lakes more than others. It just kind of depends on the time of year. Cutthroat will do this. Lake trout will do this. Rainbows will do it. I don't really see brown trout or tiger trout suspending in open water, but I'm sure it happens. They have to get from point A to point B somehow, and so They're around, but that's kind of an idea. So if you know a lake that's going to be more cutthroat heavy, this might be something to focus on. Finally, structure. So I listed all the structure here, and I could read it all off, but that's boring. We're looking at things. Structure just helps fish stay oriented. If anyone goes up to Albany and fishes the Calapooya, where the Calapooya flows into the Willamette, it's basically completely scored flat, except for there's one bigger boulder kind of in the middle of the mouth of the river. And if no one's swimming and hanging out around there, the fish are glued to that like someone stapled them to that rock. Fish love structure. The saying that I always have always heard is you can find structure without fish, but you can't find fish without structure. And that structure could be a shade line, it could be any of these many trees in Crane Prairie, for example. It could be a channel. And a channel, I used to think was the water goes from 10 feet to 20 feet. That's what the channel is. A channel there can be 10 feet, it can drop down to 12, and that's it. That little transition, that little drop off is enough for fish to orient to it. So that's the thing. You're looking for something like that. A great example is you can use the shoreline. If the shoreline is steep and drops down, the bottom of the lake is probably going to do something similar. It's just going to drop down to different shelves. You can look at these reservoirs as they drain out at the end of the season. Go to Green Peter, go to Foster, go to Detroit. You'll see the shoreline and you'll see these different steps or stumps or gravel. Sometimes it's a different substrate. They'll transition between a more mud bottom to a more sand bottom or a more rocky bottom, and that transition will hold fish. Fish are very weird. They find these things, and that doesn't mean they're there year round. Certain times of year they change, but something to consider is you're looking for some kind of structure, either through fish finders, through your eyes, through experience, through going to a lake when it's low. For example, I fished Haystack 2 weeks ago, and it's about 54% capacity when I fished it. Half the capacity when you guys had your outing. And I learned a lot. I not only caught fish, but I learned, okay, this is what the bottom of the lake looks like. Okay, there's a step here, there's going to be a drop off here. So when I come back next year in March, I'm going to be much more suited to fish that lake than had I fished it March this year with never going into it. So there's a lot of things to consider, but the kind of the structure I'm looking for is weed bed, weed bed, weed bed. So I'm looking for an organic bit of structure. Now, if I'm talking about bass, that's a different story, but we're talking about trout in this presentation. So I'm looking for weed beds, shoals, points, places like that. So what do trout eat in Stillwaters, right? So we know where they hang out. We know when to fish for them. We know kind of what type of lakes they tend to be in. So what do they eat? And the answer, I could just put a slide up here and say everything, but that's not fun. So what we're going to talk about is like chironomids. Chironomids are going to be the number one food source in a lake by numbers, meaning that if you had to count everything by one chironomid, two chironomid, or caddis or mayfly, there's more chironomids in a lake than anything else in a lake. And so fish really focus in on them. And so you can see, this is a throat sample I did. You can see the live chironomid in there twitching, which is a great sign. If you do a throat sample and you have living organisms in there, that means they recently ate them, which means that the fish are targeting that right now, which means you just have to match that. As long as you have something of that size, that color, at the depth that the fish are at, you're going to catch them because that's what they're eating. A throat sample is, I do a throat sample on the first fish I can. Now, a fish under about 14 inches, it's tough to do a throat sample. Their throats are too small to get the applicator down into their throat to suck the food out. But once they get about 14 inches plus, I always do a throat sample. And I can learn so much from that. Sometimes there's nothing in them. Sometimes there's tons of food in them. Sometimes there's specific types of food. I fished Three Creeks Lake a couple years ago where they closed the road to do road repairs. They did an okay job. It's getting worse, as Beth said. It's just kind of the nature of that road. When it gets snowed on and it's not paved, it changes every single year. But the point being is I went up there after they finished the construction, the day after it opened. When I got up there and started fishing, I did a throat sample on a fish and got some chironomids, a couple leeches, but I got a couple really fluorescent red bloodworms. And so I went, well, that's a pretty obvious take. I'll put on some bloodworms. And then I didn't change my flies for the rest of the day because I couldn't stop catching fish on bloodworms. Had I not done that throat sample, I never would have known, and I would have struggled throughout the rest of the day changing flies and changing flies and changing flies. And I'm pretty quick on changing flies and tying knots, but they still soak up time every time you do that. The wind blows your float tube away. You got to kick back to where you want to be. You did your knot wrong. You break stuff. You want to be able to keep the flies on for as long as you can, and that was a great way to do that. So speaking of that, chironomids, number one method. If I had to pick one fly to go in there with, for a non-leech style fly, a chironomid's a great way to go. The next one would be leeches. Another throat sample here, big old leeches. I love seeing how big the leeches are when I pull them out of fish. They're huge. And that's what I want to tell everyone who paddle boards and kayaks on these lakes. There's huge leeches in here. Watch out. Don't don't tell them they don't bite, because that ruins it, but let them know there's big leeches in there. And there might be fewer paddle hatches when we go out and go fishing. And so, but I've always thought leeches were kind of a make-believe thing. You only see them in movies and TV shows. Bridge on the River Kwai, for example. They're not here in Oregon, but they're everywhere. Leeches are literally everywhere, and they get big, and fish love them. And so a leech is always a good food source to imitate. Annelids, again, fly fishermen and fly tyers are fancy. Annelids is a fancy word for worm, right? So worms work really well. We all know that because we were all a kid at one point. But there's aquatic worms that actually can live in the water and get oxygen out of the water without having to breathe air. And we call those annelids. And they're really tiny. You can see this one here. It's really thin. It's really tiny. It's not like an earthworm. It's not like a night crawler. It's a little bit different. But the fish love them and eat them. A place like Diamond has a ton of annelids in there. It's probably why an apse worm works so well. It's why squirmy worms work well. It's why little leeches work well, because they kind of look like little worms. And fish like worms. It's just kind of a proven fact. Daphnia, this is that tube of Daphnia that I pulled out. It's really gross. It's really terrible looking. It's all black sludge of Daphnia. They kind of look like ticks that have been sucking on blood for a while. They're kind of gross looking, but fish will eat them. They'll eat them in huge numbers, like you can see here. That came out of one fish. And what they eat, how they eat them is they kind of swim through them, kind of like a whale eating krill. They'll just swim through them and eat them. They don't cluster, contrary to popular belief. There's been no proof that they ball up and cluster. We just assume that they did because they would eat so many of them. But when the fish are on them, they'll target them specifically. Remember, elephants eat peanuts. These fish will just slowly eat these up throughout the day because it's an available food source and water that they feel comfortable in. So they'll just eat them and 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 eat them until they're totally full. But fish that are focused on these, they're going to be focused on bright flies, slow flies, flies in their zone because they're locked. They're locked to a depth typically. We'll see if that comes back. Oh. Perfect. So, scuds. This is probably the unsung hero of the stillwater world. Criminally underfished by probably everybody in this room. Scuds are the macro of the fish world when it comes to bulking up. Fish that eat scuds get big. And that's all I'll say about that. But the scuds are great. This is actually a throat sample from Diamond Lake specifically. These scuds are in there. They're very small. They're about a size 18, tan, and they range in about a tan to an orange color, sometimes a little bit olive. It just depends on what body of water they're in and what kind of food that they're eating. But tan, gray, olive, orange, pink, those are kind of the colors you want to go with. Orange ones don't necessarily mean that they're dead. Scuds contract a parasite that's orange in color when it's in their system, and so they'll turn orange as well. It's not that they're pregnant or carrying eggs. It's just a little parasite in them. They're happy with it, I guess. And the fish know that. They'll eat them as well. And so the only downside to scuds or lakes that have a lot of scuds in them is fishing can be really tough. And the reason is if you eat enough shrimp cocktail, you're not going to want a burger, right? And the fish are the exact same way. They'll load up on these scuds and they really don't want anything else because scuds, like shrimp that we eat, are basically 90% protein, 10% water, and they know that, and they really, really like them. Mayflies, this is at Three Creeks Lake. This is a little calabaeus, probably a size 16, little tiny guy. But that is your most predominant mayfly you're going to see in the water. It's going to be a calabaeus. There's other ones, blueing olives and PMDs and drakes and hexagenias, but they're usually lake specific. But generally, what you're going to see on almost all lakes here in Oregon specifically are going to be calabaeus. And they tend to be about a gray color, anywhere from a size 18 to a size 12, 10 at the biggest. I haven't really seen so many that are that big, but 14, 16 is a really good size to kind of go with them. But they're everywhere. The nymphs, the adults, emergers, spinners, they're throughout the system all summer long. They're an awesome hatch. And lakes that are famous for that is East Lake, Crane Prairie, Three Creeks, a lot of that there. You got dragons and damselflies. This is a dragonfly nymph here. But these are all over in the system. I should have updated my pictures here with some damsels I got out of a haystack. I was looking in the water while I was stripping flies back. You know how it is. You get bored as you strip flies back. If I'm not catching a fish on every cast, I start looking around. And so looking around and I see these, when I say fluorescent green, I mean almost chartreuse in color. damsel nymphs, and they're tiny. They're about a half inch long at the longest, but fish love them. And the thing is they like to chase them because these are one of the only bugs in the water that can actually swim and propel themselves. And so you can move your flies pretty quickly, and the fish will know that, and they'll pick up on it, and they'll whack them. And so when I caught those damsels in my net and was looking at them and kind of put them on my hand and was kind of checking them out, I switched to damsels on my flies and caught 2 more fish for the day. So it worked out really well. So don't negate the damsels. There's a reason why there's a ton of olive flies that we fish. One of the guys here was tying olive flies, olive stillwater nymphs. It's basically a damsel. And they range in size. Don't hesitate to tie them really small or really big. They're just there. They live in the water for a long time, kind of like a stonefly. Stoneflies will be nymphs for about 3 years. These guys are the same kind of deal. They'll be nymphs for a long time. So you don't have to match the hatch dead on. You can kind of vary in size. Terrestrials, that's a beetle out of Diamond Lake with its antenna. It's about 3.5 inches long. It's a big old bug. So don't be afraid to throw big beetles and big flies. Throw the fat Alberts, throw the chubby Chernobyls, throw big flies like that. Fish like terrestrials, especially in Central Oregon. We have a ton of them. We have a ton of beetles, a ton of ants, and the fish like them. The theory is that ants are acidic, just like tomatoes are for us, and that's why they like them. It has a nice flavor, so that's why they kind of target them. Baitfish is another one. There's lots of lakes that we have that have invasive baitfish populations. Diamond is probably the most famous one with its tui chub and golden shiners. East Lake's probably right behind it with its tui chub population. And so the fish do eat them. Baitfish are on the menu all the time, especially in the fall. If you go out to the UK and you fish stillwaters in the fall, you're going to be fishing poppers and zonkers for trout because they will corral baitfish up against weed beds, up against jetties, up against riprap walls, and crash through it just like Dorado or bonita in the saltwater. And our fish, just because they're not from England, doesn't mean they don't eat baitfish like that. They do that a lot. I have a friend of mine who's caught quite a few browns, tigers, and rainbows at Diamond Lake on poppers, on baitfish poppers. So those are around as well. Some of the other bugs, right here we have a caddis. This is a longhorned sedge. Sedge, again, fancy word for caddis, because fly tires have to be unique. If you hear a sedge and someone says, oh, it's different than a caddis, they're the same exact bug. It's just a different name. Longhorned sedges are in our central Oregon lakes. They kind of look like mayflies because they have such long antenna on them. You think that's the tail of the mayfly. It's actually the antenna of these caddis. And I've been on Crane Prairie when they're coming off, and when the fish eat them, it sounds like people are throwing cantaloupes in the lake. They eat them aggressively because they move really, really quick. And so they've kind of come and gone as far as the seasons go. They used to be very plentiful back in the day. They've been less plentiful over the years, but it's good to have some of that. There's lots of other bugs. I put up terrestrials. Ants are a great deal there. I'm trying to think of any other bugs. There's lots and lots of bugs. Fish are 3 things I like to tell people. They're opportunistic, they're competitive, and they're curious. So even if it's not the most traditional food source, they're willing to eat it. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. So some of the gear for stillwater fly fishing. I like gear. I have what they call GAS, Gear Acquisition Syndrome. I think we all have it here. Every time I think I got enough stuff, they come out with a new thing, or I get into a new style of fly fishing, or I have to get that new material for fly tying. And so I'm sure you guys are all like that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in this hobby. But I say that every hobby kind of has this. So the gear. So I focus on 5 weights through 7 weights. I specifically fish 6 and 7 weights in stillwater. And all my stillwater rods are 10 feet long. I started with 9-foot 5 weights, then did 9.5-foot 6 weights, then I did 10-foot 6 weights, and I love fishing those, and I also love fishing my 10-foot 7 weight. 10-foot 7 weights are great when you're fishing from the shore, or you're fishing big flies or for big fish, or you plan to cast a bunch. So if you're going to be casting over and over and over and over again, and you don't think you're going to be staring at a bobber for most of the time, then a 7 weight or a 6 weight's the way you want to go. 10 feet long for a few reasons. One, it allows you to aerialize line higher off the water. There's all this trigonometry that allows you to do that. I'm not going to bore you with all the trigonometry on that. We left that a long time ago back in college and things like that. So that helps you, one, get your line higher off the water. I also fish really long leaders, so it helps me keep my leader aerialized as well. It also means that as the flies are approaching the shore, the watercraft I'm in, the boat, the float tube, it allows me to have my flies further away from the boat Again, there's more trigonometry in that allows that to happen, and that means the fish are willing to eat my flies closer to the boat because they're less spooked by it because the flies are further away. It also gives me a more sensitive tip. You might be sitting there going, he fishes a 7 weight? Why does he fish a 7 weight for trout? That seems really, really heavy. I fish a 7 weight for smallmouth or even for steelhead. Why would I fish a 7 weight for trout? Well, a 10-foot 7 weight has a much softer tip. And so that rod can actually feel not as broomsticky as you would think. Um, that's with the taper and the design. My rod that I use personally is the Echo Stillwater. That's the rod that I use. I'm a big Echo fanboy. If you talk to me about any rods, I'm going to say Echo, Echo, Echo the whole time. I'm going to sound like an Echo. That being said, pick the rod you like. If you're a sage fisherman, fish sage, or TFO, or Reddington, or TNT, or whatever brand out there that's there. It just kind of depends on your budget. I kind of ordered these in least expensive at the top to most expensive at the Sage R8. Now the Vision Still Maniac, the Hanik Stillwater, and the Airflow Airlight V2 Comp rolls right off the tongue. Those three rods are exclusive to European dealers or UK dealers. So if you're willing to buy it from a UK fly shop and have it shipped over here to the States, be my guest. But those are Stillwater dedicated rods done by the best in the world. The UK anglers are probably the best Stillwater anglers in the world, and they really do it well. Now, when it comes to reels, you want a reel large enough for line and some backing. I don't even say large arbor style reels anymore because if you're buying a new reel, they're all large arbor style. They don't manufacture small diameter spools anymore. And so just get a reel that has a lot of spools available that are relatively affordable. I fish cassette reels, but they came into fashion because of the comp guys here in the States, and then no one bought them, so they've kind of got rid of them all. Probably the best Stillwater reel that people can get here in the States is the Lamson Liquid or Remix, and use those interchangeable spools. They're relatively affordable. Lamson's drag system is phenomenal. The difference between a liquid and a remix, they use the exact same spools except for the remix has a machined aluminum housing where the liquid has a cast aluminum housing. So if you think you're going to beat up your reels a lot, you're going to bang them on the bottom of your boat all day, go with the remix because they'll last a little bit longer. If you think you're going to be gentle enough, go with the liquid. The drag systems are identical. That's a cool thing. The liquid, remix, speedster, lightspeed, and I think one other reel all have the exact same drag system. So from a $600 reel down to a $100 reel, same drag, just different housing for all that stuff. You save money, you spend more money to save it on weight. The other reel you can get is a Hardy Ultra Disc cassette. It's a cassette reel distributed by Hardy. Hardy is an English company, but they do a pretty good job distributing it here in the States. It's an expensive reel. It's about $450 a reel, but each new spool is only $30. So it makes it pretty affordable once you kind of make that investment. But the other ones, the Airflow Switch or Switch Pro, those are cheap. The Airflow Switch, it's awesome. It's a reel, $100, comes with 5 spools to begin with. It's really nice. They don't sell it here in the States at all, and they refuse to. The Mayfly company that controls Airflow, Able, Ross, and Dynaking refuses to distribute it here in the States because they don't want it to compete with Ross and Able, which I think people who are buying Able reels aren't looking for $100 cassette reels, but I don't work there, so I can't change their mind on that. So if you can get it from a UK company, that's great. Snowbee you can get from either Australia or they're starting to come to the United States. They have a cassette reel. Same thing with Grays. Cassette reels are really, really cool. I can only carry so many things when I came, so I brought fly tie and stuff. Normally I have my boat back, and I would show you my cassette reel. But it's really cool. If you just look them up, you'll see them online of people kind of demoing them. They're a good reel. The next thing is watercraft. I use a float tube. That's what I have, but I'm sure most everybody in here has a float tube or a pontoon boat. If you're into fly fishing enough, that's typically you have one or both or multiple of everything. When you do it long enough, you end up with 4 float tubes, unless you sell them or give them away. But I love my float tube. They're much more affordable. They're much smaller. They fold up and fit inside a bin, and I can put it in my storage closet in my apartment. It doesn't take up a ton of room. But pontoons are bigger. They usually have oars. Some are framed, some are frameless. They allow you to tackle bigger water, carry more. A float tube, you're not really hooking up an electric motor to it. But With pontoon boats, you can, both the framed and frameless versions. It depends on what you want to go with. Probably the two most known brands are Outcast and Skadden. Outcast is a national brand that's really, really great. Skadden's done by one guy, Dave Skadden. I think he's out of Idaho, if I remember correctly. His products are awesome, but it's just him. So the only complaint I've heard is if something does go wrong, he's kind of a hard guy to get a hold of. Outcast is really great. I actually had my seat of my float tube was failing. I fished Clearwater, so I went home, blew it up, sprayed it with soapy water. Sure enough, there's a leak on one of the seams. I just sent him a message back saying, "Hey, I've had this for like a year, and I probably put 20-ish days, but my last one didn't have this problem, and I fished it for 7 years. Do I need to do something?" They said, "Give me your address, we'll send you a new one." And they got it to me in about 3 days. So that's kind of the difference. Sometimes it's nice to have a company that has a really nice product that doesn't fail, but there's always a chance that something could happen, and it's nice to have a company that can respond very quickly. So I tend to like Outcast. They've been pretty good to me for the ones that I've had. Now, some terminal tackle. It's nice to have a throat pump, a vial, forceps, nippers. Diamond Lake stole one of my forceps. It fell off the boat that I was fishing, so it has a net and a forcep for me over the years. Nippers are always good. I carry like 3 or 4 on me when I go. I got them in my boat bag. I got them on my chest pack. I got them on my belt loop. Swivels, always important when you fish indicators. Tippet, leaders, bug net, underutilized tool. Has anyone ever been on Crane Prairie or Diamond or Klamath when the midges are coming off and you can't even blink because they're in your eyes and in your ears? Buy a $2 bug net and just keep it in your pack. You won't need it, you won't need it, you won't need it, and all of a sudden you'll go, "Oh my, I have my bug net," and you'll put it on and your life will be better. So have one in there. Notebook and pen. Everyone here, I think, is really bad at it. At least I am. I'm terrible at taking notes, but it's always good to take notes. Mud. Mud is a really cool material. It's a surfactant. Again, getting fancy here, but essentially it means it takes off all the water tension off that line. Has anyone ever cast it out their sinking fly? They cast it out and it just sits on the surface. So does your tippet. So does your leader. Like, I wanted that to sink right now. Coat it with some mud, takes it all off. It's a mixture between an unscented detergent, formulated earth, and glycerin. It's really cool. You can make it yourself. If someone bought all that stuff and made it here in your club, you'd have enough to give everyone a lifetime supply just by buying one batch of it. But they sell in little pucks. It's easy to get. Float bobber stoppers, Sharpies, those are always good. I keep a multi-tool. The amount of boats that I've rented that have had problems is shocking. So it's nice having a multi-tool just in case. A drogue, that's kind of a cool thing. I don't know if we'll get too much into that. It's essentially a parachute to slow your drift. Clamps, first aid kit, toilet paper, self-explanatory, and food. I'm notorious for not eating when I go fishing, and my fiance hates that. So I try to remember to bring some snacks. So I actually get out of fishing mode and get some food in me. So lines, that's the other thing that you got to have is lines. I carry about 16 fly lines when I go fishing for my 6 weights. That's a lot of lines. I know. You don't have to be crazy like me. That's a lot. The main lines that I would recommend is a floating, a midge tip, and an intermediate line right here in that first column here. There's a few different types. You have indicator style floating lines. They have a very aggressive forward taper. They can turn over an indicator on multiple flies and long leaders. Dry fly lines are much more delicate. They're great for fishing a single calabatus or a dry dropper setup. Midge tips are integrated sink tip lines. They're different from what you're thinking of. Most sink tip streamer lines are 25 feet long or longer. These ones are short, anywhere between 3 to 12 feet long, and they don't sink very quickly. Half an inch to an inch and a half per second. They're very, very effective lines. If you don't have one, I'd recommend getting one. The Scientific Angler Emerger tip was my first one, and I love it. The first people to make one was Rio, and Rio called it the midge tip, and their 3-foot midge tip is phenomenal as well. Intermediate lines, they come in a bunch of different sink rates. We always just say intermediate, but turns out there's lots of different variations. The fast intermediate only sinks at an inch and a half per second, and that's my favorite line. Half the fish I catch every year are on that line specifically. So the fast intermediate from Airflow is my favorite line. Rigged up with that when I first get to the water, bare minimum. I'm going to go fishing in a couple weeks. One rod will have that line on it. One rod will have something else. But that line specifically catches me a ton of fish. If you don't like an opaque line or a camo line, you can find glass lines, which are clear. You can find Aqualux lines, which are a clear tinted blue line. Or you can get a Camo Lux line, which is a multicolor line. Usually it's olive, black, and brown. I don't think they work any better than the opaque line that I have. I've caught so many fish on it. I really haven't run into an issue of the fish being spooked by my line. If they're spooked by my line, they're going to be spooked by my leader and they're going to be spooked by my fly. There's almost nothing I can do. So I typically go with a the fast intermediate from Airflow. They have slow intermediates, which sink at half an inch per second, and then sometimes you'll see a line called a hover, which sinks at an inch per second. Sweep lines are really cool. A guy actually called me today. I did a presentation up in Beaverton a couple weeks ago, or last week, and he called me because he wanted to know about sweep lines or parabolic lines. They're really cool. They sink at different sink rates throughout the line. So the head will sink at one sink rate, the belly will sink at a faster sink rate, and then the running line will be the same as the head. So you end up getting this what they call like a smiley face kind of sink rate. This is really cool because it allows you to fish up onto a drop off and then down the drop off. There's no other line in the world that can let you do that. And so I love these lines. I had a guy that kicked my butt at a fly fishing competition at Paulina because he was able to cast his team of flies up onto the shoal and pull them off the shoal down the drop off. And as soon as they started to descend off that drop off, bam, fish on. So that's really cool. My favorite one I have is the 353. It's really great for pulling streamers and things like that, but they have lots of different ones out there from different companies. And then sinking lines. All these lines here, that's crazy. You don't need a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 line at all. Usually people skip a line. They go 2, 4, 6, 8, or 3, 5, 7 kind of lines. I do 3, 5, 7. And you would think to yourself, why do I need a 5 when I already have a 3? How much is 2 more seconds faster, right? Well, don't think of it as 2 more seconds faster. Think of it as that Type 5 sinks 66% faster than my Type 3. 66% faster is a considerable difference, right? It means that my flies can either be pulled 66% faster at the same depth as my Type 3, or it means that I have to wait 66% less time for my flies to get to the same depth, which means that I don't have to sit there and wait. I can be fishing much quicker. So if I'm in the boat and I'm sharing the boat with you, and you're sitting there waiting for your line to count down, but mine's already at depth and going, theoretically, I'm going to catch more fish. I'm fishing my flies longer than you are. You're doing more waiting, or anyone else that's doing that. It doesn't mean you have to need to run out and go buy all these lines right now, but consider that. If you're like, I just sit there and wait for my line to sink most of the time, up your speed. That's something to consider. I used to think the same way. I used to think, well, why do I need a 5 when I have a 3? That, when I realized that information, total game changer for me. So let's just put it all together here, right? So we need to know about the knots you have to have, right? So you have things like clinch knots. That's going to attach my leader to my fly line, triple surgeons. That creates my droppers for my leaders. Uni knots for adding new dropper tags. Davy knots. If you don't know the Davy knot, swear by it. It's how I attach my flies to my tippet every single time. Double Davy is basically an extra loop in that knot, and it's great for big flies. And then loop knots. This is for attaching bait fish and sometimes chironomids. People do that. I'm not a big loop knot guy, but I like to have that knowledge in my bank if I need to ever use it. But these are some knots to use to put it kind of all together. So putting it all together with everything is you now know the Stillwater, you know the season, you know when to go, you know the food, you know the gear, and you know the wind. The wind is what's moving everything in the lake together, right? We've talked about the wind being the current of the lake. To really double down on that, the wind pushes everything in the lake. Chironomids can't swim, and everything else that can swim in a lake doesn't swim very well. So the wind is the driving force. So if you go, where do I fish in a lake? You're going to want to fish a shoal that's being blown, the wind's blowing into it. Which means that if you're on the bank, that's going to be really tough, because you got to cast into the wind. But if you're in a boat or a float tube or anything else like that, it makes it really easy. You just fish that shoal because that's where the food's going, that's where the fish are going to go, and that's where you should go. So that puts it all together. That gives you everything that you need to have here. We're going to wait for it to come back and make sure we're not missing anything. We're missing some beginner equipment. So this kind of sums up your beginner equipment. So things like your rods, your spools, your lines. You're going to want to have some flies. If you notice, I only have a couple dry flies in there, calabatus and ants. I would carry ants over a calabatus, if anything. And then some additional resources. So these are a lot of different things out there. If you guys are book people, Those are the books at the top. These are the ones that I really, really like. Specifically, Stillwater Fly Fishing by Devin Olson. It's one of my favorites. And the YouTube channels there are some of my favorites as well. Most of them are English fly fishermen. One's an Australian, one guy's in Utah. And then you can always subscribe to my channel. I got enough YouTube videos up there now. Had someone ask about them earlier, so you can go see them. I'm fishing salt, Stillwater, rivers, kind of everything here in Oregon. So that kind of gives everything there. I didn't put a lot of fish pictures in there, so I always like to kind of show them off here at the end. So some of the bigger fish that I caught and some doubles and things like that. But we'll finish off. Does anyone have any questions? One in the far back. Okay, so the question was about intermediate sinking lines and the difference between different sink rates with an intermediate. So intermediate lines traditionally have always just been a fast intermediate, sinking at 1.5 inches per second. With the technology of line building, they've actually been able to change that and be much more finesse with how much tungsten they add to that line versus how many glass air beads they add to the line. That's how they float and sink lines. For those who don't know, the plastic is either impregnated with tungsten powder or with very, 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 very small glass beads full of air. And so they've been able to figure that out and change that. So a slow sinking or a slow intermediate is a really great line because it means that it's right underneath the waves and that the waves and the wind can't affect it as much. So some people will fish dry flies on that slow intermediate line. Because if you ever fished a dry fly and all of a sudden your line just does this, it just bows out, this is annoying. 1/2 inch per second means that you can cast that line out, and as long as your fly doesn't sit there for 3 minutes, you can recast again and again and again, and your line will be less affected by the wind. Hover lines are really great if you plan to really slow move a fly, but you don't want it to sink too quickly. And that fast intermediate line for me sinks at the perfect rate. I have all three of those, but I fish that fast intermediate more than anything. One and a half, yeah. And then it's 1 inch for the hover or the medium intermediate, and then 1/2 inch for the slow. So sometimes I'll mark them as a hover line or a hover intermediate line. That's that medium fast. And again, you wouldn't think 1 inch to 1.5 is a big difference, but if you're fishing a 1 inch sinking line and then you fish a 1.5, that's a 50% increase in your sink rate. So that's a huge improvement. I mean, we get excited for 8% in the stock market. 50% in a fly line is incredible. So. Any other questions? Yeah. The slow or the Airflow is my brand that I prefer. They have the most fleshed out Stillwater line selection in the market. Period. They have more Stillwater lines than anybody else. They have all the sweep lines. They have all the intermediate lines. They have all the sinking lines and everything in between. They have some cool other lines, like an anchor tip or a booby basher and things like that. So I prefer Airflow, and then I'd probably go to Scientific Angler, and then Rio, and then I guess some people buy Cortland still, but those are kind of the breakdown of lines that I prefer. Now, if you have a brand, fly lines are kind of like cigarettes. Everyone kind of has their brand, and they stick to it. So when that comes down to it, if you have a brand that you like, go for it, but they might not have it. I had a guy ask me about the sweep lines. He wanted to buy Scientific Angler. They have 1 sink rate for their sweep line. Rio has 2. Where Airflow has 3. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do. Any other questions? Yeah. They work. I have balanced leeches in my fly boxes. I keep them there as well. But I'm mostly casting and retrieving most of my flies. And so I don't really use a ton of balanced leeches. I do have them. I do fish indicators. It's not uncommon for me to do it. I fished Diamond over Memorial Day weekend, and that's all I fished for balanced leeches underneath indicators because that's what they wanted. But you can absolutely put them into your setup. I didn't really talk about flies at all because the flies are the least important factor when it comes to fly fishing a lake. If I'm on a lake and someone's asking me what fly I'm using, I know that they're not asking a genuine question in that. They may think they are, but what the question you should ask is, what line are you fishing? Because if I'm fishing a damsel, right, and I'm fishing on a fast intermediate, and you fish a damsel on a type 5, we're essentially fishing 2 totally different flies in totally different parts of the water. Where if I put a leech on and a damsel and we both have the same sink rate, we're going to be fishing very similarly. So the question should always be not what fly are you using, is how deep are you sinking, how quickly are you retrieving the flies, where are the flies in the water column? That's the questions you should be asking. That's what the questions I ask when I go fishing. When I'm in a boat and I see someone I know, I don't reach out to Michael and go, "Hey, Michael, what fly are you using?" I go, "How deep are you fishing?" That tells me so much more information. I rarely use indicators. So I fish washing lines. I fish naked or straight line chironomid fishing a lot. Again, this was geared more towards a new person fishing, so we're not going to get into the gritty details. If you guys have me back, we can maybe get into the 201 of all this. But yeah, the washing line or straight line is how I like to fish them because it's a lot more exciting. When you're fishing under an indicator, when it's good, it's great. I love fishing underneath an indicator. When as soon as the flies get to depth, that indicator gets pulled down. There's almost nothing better than that. But when they're not focused on that, when an indicator doesn't work, it is between watching paint dry and grass grow. It is really boring to stare at a bobber all day when they're not into flies underneath a bobber. But when I fish them underneath a washing line or straight line, nymph fishing or straight line buzzer fishing, chironomid fishing, that's a little bit more active for me, and it makes me not want to pull my hair out. But good questions. Any other questions while I'm up here? Otherwise, I'll hang out too. If you're too shy for front of the class, but we'll give it back to Beth. You can come find me.